Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to VARTAI's special arrangement here, this distinguished meeting we have today with two great personalities in the contemporary art world. We have Egidio, and Daniel here, Manzona, and I would like to introduce you very shortly to these two persons before we start the talks together. I would like to say that you're most welcome to ask questions. It is the idea that you could address yourself to our guest. So don't hesitate, don't be modest, feel free to participate in the talks and in the discussion. Egidio was born in 1944, sorry, I don't have my reading glasses here, in Bielefeld in Germany, and currently lives in Berlin. In the 1960s, he started acquiring works from friends and the galleries Konrad Fischer, as you probably all know it is. Later in the 70s, Manzona opened his own publishing house and started focusing on and collecting 20th century avant-garde and modern art, which you will see, if you go into an interview or inside, you can see the fantastic works of this collection. Manzona have created one of the world's most important collection of art pauve, minimal and conceptual art. And in 2002, Manzona gifted his impressive collection to the Berlin State Museum that have exhibited the works in an intensive series of exhibitions. Manzona is currently working on an archival project that will become a study center in Berlin. It is an archive of the avant-garde of the 20th century, from the Viennese geometrical liberty to data, futurism, expressionism, and other isms. We will go into that in a little bit later.
It's actually going to happen in Dresden, not in Berlin.
In Dresden, okay, thank you. And Daniel was born in Bielefeld, Germany in 1969. He studied art history and philosophy in Bochum, and from 2001 to 2004, he worked as a curator at the PS1 Museum of Modern Art in New York. He's also a co-founder of the Navadu Press in Trieste, which publishes artist books and title on contemporary art and architecture. As an author and editor, he has numerous works of contemporary art published. His books, remember this, Minimal Art and Conceptual Art, were published by the art, architecture and design publishing company Taschen. From 2007, Daniel has directed the Berlin branch of the Konrad Fischer Gallery, and in September in 2014, he opened his own gallery in Friedrichstraße 17, if you are around, in which he exhibited Bernard Lohaus and others, international famous artists. Yes. So I will start to address myself to Egidio because I read this fantastic interviews with you in this wonderful publication here about your life as a collector, as a close friend to a lot of contemporary artists in the 60s, which was your friend, your collaboration with...
They are not anymore contemporary.
They are not contemporary anymore, no, that's true. But that's an open concept, what is contemporary art? But as a start, I would like to ask you, how come that you started your collection with art, with such art as a minimal conceptual, which I think is a rather an advanced way to start. I remember John Weber Gallery in New York. Maybe you who know something about minimal art history know something about John Weber. He once told me that when he showed the work of Donald Judd, then people was just saying, hey, come on, this is not art, because they came from American Expressionism. And so he had to teach his customers to understand these very conceptual things. And you just jumped into it right away. How come? Will you talk about that?
I was just curious.
Curious, yes. Mm-hmm.
So the beginning was, I was quite often in Düsseldorf, and it was also for 20 years my home. And I met Konrad Fischer, and he showed me, because he was in Germany, the first gallerist, he showed the American conceptual and minimal artists. And I was very impressed, and I was starting buying from him. So every exhibition that he did, my first piece that I bought was about Ryman painting. My family was not very amused about this because it was nothing, just a white nothing. And I spent a lot of money, $300. So I was very upset about this. And then I had the idea, I never studied art history, so I used my my publishing house to make my own study about the history of art. And I was publishing, let's say, 90% the art of the 20s, like Dada, Bauhaus, and architecture also from the time. And so I spent a lot of time, 20 years, to publish maybe 60, 70 books. And then I was finished with I closed my publishing house. I went to the garage where all the artwork was stored that I bought from Konrad Fischer and other places in the 60s and early 70s. And then I realized that I was a collector.
Yeah.
I was not starting to build a collection. I was confronted with his artworks, and then I realized that I'm a collector. And then, because the idea for me as a collector was also to create a kind of time picture. So I used this material that I bought a long time before, and then I started to complete this work. This was very, very important act for me.
Can you hear me? Is it this better? I noticed on the visual materials I got from the gallery that you had some works of Carl André. I guess you also have works of Donald Judd. Sure. What do you see a difference between those two figures in the minimal tradition? In your perspective from today, what do you think was important there?
I think I'm more impressed. I have some Judd pieces for sure. She had an important position in the minimal art, but I was always more, and even Konrad, my teacher, by Karl. Karl, he was, I have a big piece by him in my place in Italy. Because since nearly 40 years, I invite artist friends to make an intervention in the landscape, also in the houses. And Karl did a huge piece for me. It's a run, it's 100 meters long on wood beams. And this reminds me in the idea of Brancusi with the endless columns. Yeah. So Karl was for me much more important than Donald, because also Donald it was not a competition, but a difference between these two artists. Donald was more based on theoretical things. And Karl was more influenced by poetry.
Yeah, we can see that in his concrete poetry. Daniel, you have been writing about minimal and conceptual. Will you say that there is a time before and a time after in Western art history in connection to minimal and conceptual?
Yeah, there's for sure a time after. The time before, I would say, was also the time my father heavily collected. Conceptual art, we all know, maybe is not really thinkable without knowing Duchamp and some, other people who started to work much earlier, and were really, for me, the founders of the real founder of conceptual art is Marcel Duchamp. And then you have different strings of conceptual art. You have the American, more analytic, more based on language, people. You have similar approaches also in England. The German conceptual art was always a little more loose compared to that, and a little more interested still in objects, and not so theoretical. But that came in its purity and in its, let's say, innocence to an end in the late 70s, for me. And then you have the picture generation, you have people like Richard Prince, who did actually very interesting conceptual work early on. But then, he moved on and arrived at very different works. You have Cindy Sherman and so on. So it really, the breaking point is the late 70s for me.
Diego, in the paper here, in the interview, you're talking about, well, you're not saying that the art is dead, but something is culminating with minimal art for you. And what happened after that in this interview, I feel there's an unease with the situation in the contemporary art scene. Mm-hmm. Is that correct, understood for me, or is it mistakes? Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah. As Duchamp said in an interview in the mid-50s, he prognosticated that the art will be killed by money.
Yes.
And we have this problem now that we have a kind of inflation about young art. For example, in Berlin we have 600, 700 galleries. Mm. On the other hand, a huge speculation with art. Mm. So there are two ways, very different, contrary, and it seems that something will happen. Mm.
Something always happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Daniel, you have a gallery with a lot of artists, which remind me a lot about the aesthetics from the 70s. You have an archive, which you still work with, which is...
No, the archive is now going to an institution in Dresden, like the Getty. Yeah. It will be a research center, and the archive has some special moments. For example, the archive has also its own collection about artworks, mostly drawings, but also paintings by Max Ernst, Van Tongalo, and Theo van Doesburg, and other famous painter. And also, for me, it's very important, the archive is not only based on art, it's interdisciplinary. So it's philosophy, literature, music, theater, dance. And for me, it's really very important accent of this interdisciplinary.
Before I come back to Daniel, I have one more question. In the paper, in the interview here, I got that. Maybe it's wrong, but as I see it, you know the quotation from Solwit that conceptual artists are rather mystic than rationalist. They lead to conclusion that logic cannot reach. And I was wondering, do you see this archive thing you have there? Is that a way to detect the artistic process, the secret of creation? Is that because you're interested in the way that the artists are developing and achieving this recognition in the world through the media that they are working with?
Yeah, I believe in ideas.
Yes.
And the archive, has millions of ideas. And this is the basic thing. And I just told you that the archive, and this is very unique, not even Getty or Breinecke or Smithsonian has for the archive its own collection. And these artworks, I think they are important as prototypes for ideas. And this is very important for me.
So it's not about memory, it's about ideas.
It's about ideas.
So in a way, there's a philosophical approach and not an historical approach.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Interesting. Daniel, your father has been very occupied with American artists. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but the artist you have in your gallery, there is a kind of Central European atmosphere around it. Is that? Do you disagree?
It may seem so,
Yeah.
although I work with two American artists
Yes.
as well, Matthew Buckingham and Stephen Atonakos, who passed away some years ago. But for me, the concept of national or nationality and art is very misleading. And there were, in particular, after conceptual art came to an end, I think we are living in a globalized art world, and you will find great artists from Georgia, as we will see tonight. You will find great artists in Germany and wherever. And I'm not interested in the division in any kind of nationalistic view on art. It's actually completely the opposite of my concept as a gallerist. I'm interested in what I'm interested in, and that's what I show, and I think it's pretty concise. And it may be also a little bit influenced by what kind of art I experienced as a child and when I grew up. There were a couple of artists like Bernd Lohaus, who were the first I had really serious discussions with, philosophical discussions on art and literature and philosophy. And I was super happy to open my gallery with him after he had died also, because he was just for me personal a very important figure. As an artist and as a person, I had over many decades an exchange about art.
One more specific question, then we can go to some more general discussion. Would you describe will you describe your artist as a kind of post-minimalist?
No, not necessarily.
No?
I mean, they are all, or more or less, all of them are reductivist, if you want. So the art is comparably quiet and focused, and be it focused on color or focused on form and color and the relationship to space. It's not art that is in your face right away. It's art you have to think about, you have to digest, you have to spend some time and maybe to get informed about. And that's what my job is to, that's my vision, that's what I find interesting, and I think there's still a place for this kind of art nowadays, and that's what I'm fighting for.
Well, we probably, I don't know how much time we have left, but we probably have future collectors in this country with us today, and maybe it could be interesting to go into that a little bit. In the paper here, Guido, you talk about the relationship between the collector, the gallery, and the museum, and I think some of your points here are very, very important for the contemporary discussion of how museums can operate in a democratic society, how they can, on one hand, take care of the idea of enlightenment and education, and also be the archive for the population, bring the history into to the population in the democratic society. It's a huge discussion. I'm actually writing an essay now about the museum in the expanded field right now. But Guido, I was thinking about one thing, because, for instance, in Scandinavian, we have that problem that the money that there are in the state is so small now, so the museum it's not possible for the museum to buy their own works, because, for instance, Robert Smith's own work, or Donald Judd, or Walter de Maria, is so expensive now, so they simply say no way. So it is the collector who now are shaping the collection for the museums. Will you agree with that?
Yeah, it's a big discussion now. It's a big problem also. I have my own experience, and also I have my view, because I gave a big part of my collection to Berlin as a gift to the National Gallery, and I gave this archive of the avant-garde of the 20th century to Dresden as a gift, because as a collector, and I have not so many time in this world, I'm also responsible. I'm very proud that I had this really beautiful life with the artwork, with the artists, with many discussions, with ideas. I'm really happy about this, but as a collector, I have also the responsibility to the artist and to the society. So this was my reaction.
Talking about responsibility, Daniel, is it possible to have a really well-run gallery and at the same time have a social responsibility to one's artist in the gallery?
This is a good question for Daniel.
Well, I think it's possible. It's not easy right now. The market is changing, has changed, and keeps changing. And I think it's a question what you guys discussed before shortly. There was a long period of modernism up until the 60s when you had, let's say, art history and a certain kind of market history, and they were running more or less parallel. And I think that at some point we lost this connection, so you have, I think it started in the early 90s or maybe a little earlier even, where certain artists became super expensive and superstars, and a whole group of global rich men collected only a small group of superstars. But that doesn't mean that this will be important in 25 years, And this idea, it's again an idea of Duchamp, but it's an idea that you could also have without Duchamp, is that it's always the afterworld who decides. So it's not us who decide what is important, it's the people 40 years from now who will decide what has been important now. And I promise you that many of the people who are being collected for enormous amounts of money will not be in the books in 40 years. You know, they will be forgotten, really. And this is a development that has to do with the fact that there's quite enormous amounts of money in the art market, which you can even talk about the art industry if you want. I think we are at that point in industry, and it's never been like that. And the money is not very stable invested in the art market. It's just there because it seems to be a good option. And guys like my father, or in those days, you had by far less artists, you had by far less collectors, you can't compare how little money there was in the game. And it was much nicer because it was very stable. So you had a group of 1,000 people worldwide, they all knew each other, from museum directors, collectors, galleries, artists, and they all were kind of, you know...
It was a family.
It was like a family, like a big family, right? And if somebody says that to me now, that I'm part of a big family, I don't feel like that anymore. You know, I mean, I'm one of the people who are apparently really interested in art. I did also other things before I opened the gallery, but it's not one family anymore. It's like, you know, I have my family, but there are 100,000 other families around us.
And not only can we talk about sculpture in the expanded field from 79 by Rosin Krausmert, maybe we also can talk about the museum in the expanded field, because the museums today is not only are they occupied with collection, they're also occupied with education of children into art, with communication, with being a culture center, maybe a social spot. So the whole scene is not only art who is changing, but it's also the institution who are changing. And maybe I have a quite provocative question. As a Scandinavian, I can see that the status of the art in the Scandinavian country is right now going a little bit down. Design and architecture is growing up because that's where the economy is. And it seems to me that we have a generation of administrative people in government and politicians who don't remember anything about the Second World War. I can still remember it because I'm 60 years old, but something, the atmosphere at least. But this idea that art could be brought into society to build up, to be a nation-building process, will you agree that we are losing that perspective, that art is a part of an enlightenment program in this commercial approach to art? Edie, will you start? Or?
I think this question is better.
Daniel, you will have the...
It really depends. I mean, there are wonderful institutions.
Yeah.
Just to name one, there's a small place in Belgium, Ghent, and there's a SMAC in Ghent, and it's a fantastic museum still, who they are really engaged with the community. They work with kindergartens. They work with the schools. They have a group of collectors who basically finance a collection, but which is not decided by them, but by the museum director and the staff. So there are beautiful institutions. There are also, there's different times, and art for sure became part of a culture which has more to do with the spectacle, with something that is short-lived, that is easy to grasp, that is, you know, nice to go to with the family and have a good time, and don't think much about it, and don't be critical if possible. And many museum directors play that game because they have to, because it brings also money into the museum. You know, you do a show with, you know, Thomas Saraceno, you know you will get 50,000 people. You do a show with somebody else, you know you get 5. So what do? It's a complicated question, and it's not easy to blame a certain, it's not easy to blame the specific director. It's just part of it's a systematic problem we have to face. It's also part of the art market problem. The art market became like any other market now. It was a little different, but now we see that there's certain monopolies, there's certain structures. If you see the market for, let's say, dishwasher machines, right? And you see the early market of dishwashing machines, you find like 50 companies who did dishwashers. And 20 years after, it was only 5 companies who really worldwide were able to produce dishwashers. And it's a similar development in the art market now. So, and all this is part of one systematic problem, which is, I think my father is absolutely right when he said, money is killing it right now. It's actually too much money in the game. It's not too little, it's too much.
Indigo, you're talking about inflation in the interview here. I agree with you, but too many artists, too many maybe art institutions.
I think today, like yesterday or tomorrow, it will be done good art works. But to find them, it's like to find the needle in the hem stack.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is a little bit complicated for me because when I was beginning, or the first 3 decades of my collecting, it was very easy to find the right thing that I was looking for. But today, with the this is really exploding art scene, it's very, very difficult to work as a collector.
How much time do we have now? 10 minutes? I would like to ask you, both of you, this, because I guess there must be some people here who's passionately interested in art and would like to collect art. Do we have some good advice, Daniel, for future collectors in Lithuania? What would you suggest as a
There are collectors here.
I hope so, I guess so.
It's always, one good advice is to buy only what you like, no matter what. And don't buy what you don't like, but you may be told it's a great investment or what have you. Because if you buy only what you like, it doesn't matter how things develop. You will still be happy with it in 20 years, right? And nobody can guarantee you. I mean, they all pretend they could, but I never did that, and I can't tell people Vajiko will be a superstar in 20 years. He's a young artist.
He will be a superstar because I bought his last work.
No, but I believe in his work, and of course that means something maybe. But yeah, please do only collect what you really like, what you understand, and please do your homework, read about it, talk to the gallerist, talk to the artist if possible. And then you make your moves, and make your moves slowly. Don't rush. Buy one work, then if you find another artist you are interested, do the same. Get into it.
So it's not a stock we are buying. We're not.
It can be. It can be, of course, but it's not necessarily like that. It's, as my father said, it's so big now. There are so many artists. There are so many galleries. It's very hard to predict. I mean, a good advice is also look a little bit if there are institutions who worked with the artist. Did the artist do some? Is there some curatorial support for the artist? I think that still means something, although even that is, maybe a little less than it did before. And take it slowly. Don't rush. Take it step by step, and build up a good collection. And a good collection is always a collection that the collector likes the works. It's never a good collection that was bought for strategical purposes.
Guido, do you have some good advice for the future collectors in this country here?
No idea.
No idea. I like that very much. Okay, I will, before we stop this talk, we could go on for a long time. There are many questions I would like to talk to you about Bruce Nauman. Can I just come with him with some question here? 10 minutes and then we have to stop. You have in your collection Bruce Nauman's work, which probably is what we would call a process artist.
Yeah.
Coming from that tradition. On the other hand, you have this hardcore minimal who are structuralists, if you like, and in your work you can see this concretistic structural tradition transformed into many of your artist work. And both of you are talking very much about, in your works, on your homepage, we can see how important this space is in your gallery. How you think.
This is a good question.
How you think about with space. And Guido, you're talking about space in the interview, and I know that this is something which is very important for us.
Space, it's very, very important, and also the feeling, because I see now that some of this, or most of these artists of my generation, they are dead now. But if I see the installation in the museums or the changed the places of installation, let's say by Joseph Beuys, if you move the piece just 5 centimeters, it can be destroyed. So because this feeling of space is very important, especially for minimal art. For example, the first installation, the center room in the Tate Modern with the minimal collection. This was 25, 30 years ago. It looks like an IKEA shop.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important to have this feeling to work with the pieces and the space. And this, it's gone.
It's gone,
for many.
Yeah, for many, yes. Well, not for your sons. In your gallery, there's a lot. I think there's a very, very precisely way to work with space in your.
Yeah, but that's mainly done by the artist. I don't interfere so much when we install. If I have the artist in Berlin, I prefer that the artist does the show. And then if I see something may not work, or of course by now I know my space really well, oftentimes better than the artists do, I would tell them, let's try that, right? But and then we would both see maybe it's better or not. But when it comes to solo shows of my artists at the gallery, I'm not the type of gallerist who would tell them what to do. I would rather see what they develop, and then if I disagree, we can talk. But so far, they did quite well.
As we say in Denmark, a good leader, a good professor is always number 2, and a good gallerist guy is always number 2.
Well, yeah, I mean, the problem is group shows. If you deal with group shows, then you have to have a good sense of space. I believe I do have that. It's a matter of experience also. You know, you did a certain number of shows. I would say I did in my life 50 bigger shows. And then you learn what works, what could become a problem, what should be seen in what way, and what requires what kind of space. And so it's not something, it's really something it needs experience to get a sense of space, and a good artist also usually takes some time to develop a good sense for space by themselves. You know?
Both of you, you come from the 60s minimal. You are more into the 70s, maybe, in more or less. Not really.
Not really.
Not really.
I don't know
Okay.
why you're saying that, but
No,
it's okay if you.
I will forget that. But I would like to ask you before we stop: do you see any traces in contemporary art which can take up the challenge or can, develop this tradition that you were working with?
I have no idea.
No idea, no. Do you see something?
Yeah, of course I do see that, and there are quite a few really good and serious artists who take that tradition and try to work with it in a now, right, and do something that is interesting now, like Joel Türlings, for example. It's one good example, who is a fantastic artist, unthinkable without a certain minimal tradition, I would say.
A last question. Were you ever interested in Steve Reich's music and minimal music and that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Because it belongs together.
Exactly.
Steve Reich,
Yeah.
Phil Glass,
Phil Glass.
influenced by Cage and Stockhausen. And
Did you buy some of their works?
I have a very, very big collection about artist records. This is a heart of the collection.
Yes, because I think for many people it's important to emphasize that the minimal music and the minimal objects or sculptures was very, very close related historically. Steve Reich's first...
Theater also.
Yes.
Dance and theater.
Dance, choreography, because the first performance by
Some
Steve
of
Reich was together with Bruce Nauman, for instance.
Yeah, but some of the artists, there was before they started a career as an artist, musicians, like Bob Ryman was a saxophonist, Ronald Bladen, many artists had experience in the 60s with music.
Remember how Robert Morris was involved in dance?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Heavily involved.
Yeah, and they were all occupied with one big thing, but it was time. Time was a big issue, and also when I see your works,
Even the political situation was very
the
important.
concept of time.
One short notice about my son.
Yeah.
When he was 17, he was very political left, as normal.
I still am, I guess.
And he was saying, Egidio, he never was telling me Papa or Vater, Egidio, why you spend so much money for art? Buy a ticket and go in the museum.
It makes sense.
And then, 5 years later, he went with me the first time to New York, and he brought me to the gallery, and I have to buy artwork that of his choice. And this was the beginning of his collecting. And I'm thinking he used his gallery to create his own collection, but cheaper than I.
Well, you have to start somewhere. Okay, time is running, as I understand, and we have few questions. If you like to participate with questions, you're most welcome. Please feel free.
Excuse me? My first piece, I really got also quite a few gifts from artists and also from my father. I remember one work that I always liked a lot was a big drawing of Richard Serra, Clara. What he bought for me, that was a Shugimoto photograph. Yes, in architecture, it was actually the facade of a building in Rotterdam, like a Bauhaus building in Rotterdam. Yeah.
Not bad. I would like to have that piece.
At the time, it wasn't very expensive, I must say. A long time ago. I did good with that work.
Well, we can all agree that art has a future.
Art always has a future.
And there are plenty of works, artists to discover and to investigate. And and you certainly have made a great contribution to our culture with your collection, and we thank you for that. And you certainly have a wonderful gallery with a fantastic artist in your gallery. And I wish everybody to go into these two positions and to study the homepage of Daniel's gallery and to study all the information you can get from.
I have no computer.
No computer, no. That's another story, but we don't take that now. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your contribution right now and for your effort in art. It's really admirable. And I have to say on behalf of the gallery that please go upstairs. There is a show going on. Daniel's artist, where are you? Stand up, please. Will you stand up? Yeah. Should we give him a hand? Will be present upstairs. So thank you very much for your attention, and Visugara and Labas Vakaras, and enjoy the gallery, and please there are drinks, so enjoy life. Thank you very much.